Should you lift heavy weight for a low amount of reps or lightweight for a high amount of reps to build more muscle? Many powerlifters will tell you that the answer is to stick to a low rep count of 3 to 5 reps. Meanwhile, many other athletes will advocate for a higher rep range. But when it comes to building muscle, most would agree that the best place to look for advice on the optimal rep range for muscle growth would be in the bodybuilding scene, where the whole goal is to pack on more proportional muscle mass than your opponents. And bodybuilders often view the 6 to 12 rep range as the best rep range for muscle growth. Many personal trainers would agree with this as well, since the National Academy of Sports Medicine, which is one of the top certifying bodies for personal trainers, they also recommend 6 to 12 reps as the best rep range for hypertrophy or muscle growth. This rep range also just feels right from a sensory perspective, because when you're going far above 12 reps, it makes the weight feel less challenging, and when you do less than 6 reps, you don't feel much of a pump or a burn. So 6 to 12 reps for each of your sets may feel like the sweet spot for muscle growth, but when looking at the research, there's not a whole lot to back up the 6 to 12 rep range specifically. In fact, several studies show that you can build the same amount of muscle with low, moderate, and high reps. For example, we have a study dating all the way back to 2002 that showed that 4 sets of 3 to 5 reps produced as much muscle growth in all muscle fibers as 3 sets of 9 to 11 reps. Based on those results, the researchers concluded that low and intermediate rep ranges appear to lead to similar muscular adaptations as long as you're lifting a weight that's heavy enough for that rep range to just about take you to failure. Various other studies found similar results. They found that when the total training volume is the same, you can build the same amount of muscle regardless of whether you're doing low, moderate, or high rep sets. For example, a large meta-analysis looked at muscular adaptations in low versus high load resistance training. And when it came down to muscle hypertrophy, or in other words, muscle growth, no differences could be found between high loads and low loads. And in general, the evidence as a whole shows that this is true for both untrained lifters and for those who are more advanced and have been training for longer. Now, despite all that evidence, some of which was already available in the late 1990s, the 6 to 12 rep range has still continued to be considered the best rep range for muscle growth for many years. But that somewhat started to change over the last few years when studies showed that even very high rep sets, using a weight that's only 30% of the participant's 1 rep max, can be as effective for muscle growth as a traditional bodybuilding rep range, as long as the sets are taken to failure. So really, the bottom line is the latter part. Taking the sets to failure. That piece of advice is crucial to reap the muscle building benefits of high rep training, because simply doing a lot of reps with a light weight without going near failure is absolutely not effective for muscle growth. On top of that, ultra high rep sets do have their own share of problems. One of those is that they're very mentally taxing. After all, not many people have the stamina to train a failure on the squat with 30% of their 1 rep max, which again is a very light load that would require you to do a ton of reps for multiple sets. You'd have to do about 40 to 50 reps per set, which would be pure torture. In scientific studies, that generally isn't an issue, because in most studies, the scientists or their assistant trainers will train the participants one-on-one to make sure that they go all out. Having someone push you on every set actually has a significant impact on how hard you train, especially if it's a scientist or a trainer that's very driven and expects a lot from their participants. In real life, however, most of us don't have that kind of luxury, and almost all trainees don't train hard enough to reap all the benefits of high rep training. The big caveat for most people attempting high rep training outside of a lab setting is that they simply stay too many reps away from failure to make the lower weight load effective enough for muscle growth. For example, in another study, researchers examined the ability of trainees to predict how many reps they were away from failure on a number of different exercises, including the seated row, chest press, leg press, bicep curl, pull down, and the sit-up. And the results clearly showed that the participants were not able to accurately predict the number of reps they could perform before failure, and on average they were off by about 2.64 to 3.38 reps. That's a lot, and it can make a huge difference when it comes to muscle growth. On top of that, throughout this entire study, the participants were instructed to use a weight load that they would normally use when training at the gym by themselves. Since most people perform about 6 to 12 reps per set at the gym, there's a strong probability that most participants in this study were aiming for that rep range. And they were still about 3 reps away from failure. Imagine if they were told to go for 30, 40, or 50 reps. With all the mental and stamina issues that come with those higher rep ranges, they would have been even further away when predicting their point of failure. That's why very high rep sets are not effective for most people in real life. Most people simply don't train hard enough to reap the benefits. And training to failure is essential, especially if you're going for really high rep sets, because if you don't train to failure, you won't reach the recruitment threshold of the larger muscle motor units with more fibers, especially the fast twitch fibers, which have the most potential for muscle growth. Now, aside from all this, even if you somehow have the mental resilience to train to failure on your high rep sets, which most lifters don't, but if you do, there's another problem you'll run into. You'll most likely expose yourself to an unnecessary higher risk of injury. This is because the extremely long duration of your sets will fatigue your stabilizer muscles so much that it'll become near impossible to maintain proper form during the last few reps. So if you still really want to include ultra high rep sets, it's best to save them for your isolation exercises only, since those exercises are safer to perform under high amounts of fatigue. So to bring this all together, there are really 5 important things to keep in mind. First of all, very low rep training where you're only doing 1 to 2 reps is more than likely not optimal for muscle growth. We even have a study showing us that doing 8 sets with a very heavy 1 rep max weight load is inferior to doing 8 sets of 8 to 12 reps. Now, it might be possible that the low rep subjects could gain the same amount of muscle if they were to do a lot more sets so that they could achieve about the same amount of training volume as the moderate rep group, but the problem is that you would then have to spend a whole lot of time at the gym. Plus, training within a 1 to 2 rep range max is very taxing on the joints, which could lead to injuries over time. That's why I'd say that if you want to build muscle, it's best to do at least 3 reps per set. The second thing to remember is even though training within your 1 to 2 rep max isn't ideal for muscle growth, it is beneficial to include at least some low rep, high intensity sets into your workouts. You can do this in a much safer and more effective way by training within 3 to 5 reps instead of 1 to 2 reps. You want to make sure that you include this lower rep range of around 3 to 5 reps because high weight load, low rep sets are best for gaining strength. For example, a large systematic review found that there's a strong trend towards higher amounts of muscle growth in response to higher weight loads instead of lower weight loads. And gaining strength is an important factor for overall muscle growth because it means that you can use heavier weights throughout all your other sets, and that alone is a potent muscle building stimulus. The third thing to keep in mind is that both high and low rep training activate different growth pathways in your body. That's why it may be beneficial to vary your rep ranges instead of getting overly fixated on one particular rep range. This is why I'm a big fan of periodization, where you vary your reps every couple weeks or months. The fourth key point is that elderly adults may want to focus more on moderate and higher rep ranges instead of lower rep ranges. And that's not because it's better for muscle growth. In fact, research shows that elderly trainees, just like younger ones, experience the same muscle growth from both lower and higher intensities. Instead, it's because low rep, high intensity training is more likely to lead to an injury for older adults. This may be because they have less connective tissue due to a lower protein turnover rate, which increases injury risk when training with heavy weight due to weaker joints and weaker tendons. Aging also decreases the performance of the central nervous system, which may also increase the risk of injury when lifting heavy. Finally, the fifth thing to remember that ties into point number 3 is to not get fixated on one best rep range. Since you can technically get similar muscle growth within each rep range, the key comes down to training hard enough, especially if you're going with higher rep sets. And this is why when it comes to real life outside of lab scenarios, I'm still very high on going with a heavier weight for anywhere between 3 to 12 reps rather than a really light weight for 20 or 30 plus reps, simply because you'll be more likely to actually train hard enough when using the heavier weight. Unfortunately, this is where many lifters go wrong, in particular beginners. They simply don't train hard enough. And due to this fact, even though there's data that shows that high rep sets can be just as effective for muscle growth, it doesn't actually carry over in a practical setting. To give you an example, many lifters go into a set with the intention of doing a particular number of reps, let's say 20 reps. Then once they've reached those 20 reps, they'll put the weight back regardless of whether that set was hard enough or not. So they may have been able to do 2, 3, 4, or even more extra reps, but they stopped because they were fixated on that number 20. This is not something that I recommend because it causes most people to leave too many reps in the tank, failing to maximally stimulate muscle growth. Instead, it's better to do as many reps as possible for each set, which ironically enough still causes most people to leave 2 to 3 reps in the tank, as we've seen in the study from before. But at least then, most lifters get somewhat close to failure, which is already a huge improvement compared to how hard most people train. So for those of you that made it this far, I want to give you a very simple way to incorporate low, medium, and high rep training into your routine to maximize strength gains and muscle growth. One of the simplest ways to do this is to spend about 3 to 4 weeks within one of 3 rep ranges before moving on to the next one. These 3 rep ranges are 3 to 5 reps, 6 to 8 reps, and 10 to 12 reps. So you would spend 3 to 4 weeks lifting a heavy enough weight load that makes you hit failure within 3 to 5 reps. Then for the next 3 to 4 weeks, you would switch to the 6 to 8 rep range, where you would select a lighter weight than what you were using for your 3 to 5 rep range, but it would still be heavy enough to hit failure within your new 6 to 8 rep range. Then after 3 to 4 weeks of that, do the same thing for 10 to 12 reps. And simply cycling back and forth like this should help you get stronger and build more muscle faster. That about wraps it up, guys. I'm still a big fan of lifting heavyweight over lightweight, especially for the average gym goer. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Also, if you're looking for a simplified approach to burning fat or building muscle that's streamlined and comes with a full workout plan, a video exercise library, a customizable diet plan, a recipe book, and of course an accountability coach to help guide you through the whole process, then visit my website where you can get all this for free just by putting your best foot forward and sticking to the plan. To find out more, click the link in the description below, or you can visit my website directly at gravitytransformation.com. I'll see you guys soon.